The accusation hung in the air, a thing of poison and silk. It slithered through the stifling ballroom, winding around the crystal chandeliers and the cloying scent of wilting roses. Lady Genevieve Ferris felt it coil around her throat, a slow-moving garrote tightening with every whisper, every sideways glance. "The necklace is gone," Lady Danbury announced, her voice a weapon wrapped in velvet. "The Beaumont pearls, a gift from the Duke himself." All eyes turned to Genevieve, a widow, a mother of 4, a woman with no dowry and a precarious foothold on the slippery ledges of society, here only as a charity case, a distant cousin to the hostess. She was the perfect suspect, the easiest sacrifice. She looked to the man who had given her the necklace, a bauble she had never asked for and had returned to its box that very afternoon. Duke Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, stood near the fireplace, his expression a mask of cool indifference. He was a man carved from ice and shadow, his power as vast and unyielding as the northern estates that gave him his title. For a few weeks he had shown her a sliver of warmth, a fleeting interest that had felt like the sun breaking through a perpetual winter. Now that sun was gone. His gaze met hers across the suddenly silent room. There was no defense in it, no question. Only a flicker of disappointment, as if she were a flawed piece of porcelain he had briefly considered acquiring. The betrayal was a physical blow, colder and sharper than any winter wind. It struck her with the force of a tidal wave, sucking the air from her lungs and leaving a hollow, ringing silence in her ears. His cousin, Lord Percival, materialized at the Duke's side, his face a perfect portrait of feigned concern. "Alistair, surely there is a misunderstanding," he murmured, loud enough for the nearest 10 people to hear. Lady Ferris would not, though of course her circumstances are difficult. The insinuation was clear, desperate. She was desperate. Genevieve's pride, the only real possession she had left, rose up like a shield. She would not cry, she would not faint, she would not give them the satisfaction of a scene. She lifted her chin, her spine straightening into a rod of iron. The air in her lungs returned, cold and sharp. She felt the weight of her simple silver locket against her skin, the familiar press of the one thing that was truly hers. She did not wait for Alistair's verdict. She did not need to. His silence was her sentence. Without a word, she turned. She walked out of the ballroom, each step deliberate and measured. She felt hundreds of eyes on her back, hot and sharp as needles. She did not look back. She walked out of the grand London townhouse, away from the glittering hypocrisy and the man who had let her be devoured by it. She walked into the damp chill of the night, leaving the ghost of Lady Ferris to be picked apart by the vultures. Her first stop was not the small, borrowed rooms where her children slept under the care of a hired nurse. It was a pawnshop in a less reputable part of the city. She sold the only things of value she had brought with her from her previous life, a pair of sapphire earrings and a delicate gold bracelet from her mother. The money she received was a pittance, a fraction of their worth, but it felt heavier and more real than any of the Duke's casual gifts. It was the price of freedom. Back in her rooms, the city's grime seemed to cling to the velvet curtains and worn carpets. The air was thick with the smell of coal smoke and disillusionment. She looked at her sleeping children, their faces serene in the low lamplight. Leo, her eldest at 10, with his serious brow even in sleep. The twins, Alara and Finn, curled together like 2 matched puppies, their 8-year-old limbs tangled. And little Rose, just 5, her thumb tucked into her mouth, her breath a soft, trusting whisper. They were her world, her only world, and she had nearly allowed it to be shattered by a man who saw her as a passing amusement. A fierce, protective anger surged through her, a clean fire that burned away the last vestiges of shock and grief. Alistair Beaumont had judged her. Society had condemned her. Very well, she would show them what a desperate woman could do. She packed. Not the fine gowns she had worn to try and fit into their world, but the practical, sturdy clothes she had kept from her life before London. She packed her children's things, her mending kit, and the few worn books they owned. At the bottom of the trunk, she placed the small bag of coins. She left the Duke of Blackwood's pearls in their velvet box on the dressing table, a silent final rebuke. By dawn, they were gone. A woman and 4 children swallowed by the anonymity of the road, heading west. Genevieve did not know where they were going, only that it had to be far from London, far from the name Beaumont, far from the life that had almost broken her. She had shed her title, her connections, her past. She was no longer Lady Ferris. She was just Genevieve, a mother with 4 children to protect. And that, she realized as the city disappeared behind them, was a strength far greater than any dukedom. 2 years was a lifetime. It was long enough for calluses to form on a lady's hands, for a society scandal to fade into old gossip, and for a duke's regret to curdle into a constant aching poison. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, stood in the library of his ancestral home, the air thick with the scent of old leather and dust. The silence in the cavernous room was absolute. It was a dead silence, not a peaceful one. It pressed in on him, amplifying the emptiness of the house, the emptiness of his life. After Genevieve's departure, Percival had been triumphant. The threat of a penniless widow and her brood of children capturing the Blackwood title was gone. For a time, Alistair had allowed his cousin's narrative to stand. It was easier. He had retreated into the cold shell of his ducal duties, managing his estates with ruthless efficiency, attending Parliament, hosting the necessary dinners. He was the perfect duke, and he was utterly, profoundly miserable. The memory of Genevieve's face in that ballroom haunted him. The quiet dignity of her retreat was more damning than any scream or accusation could have been. He had failed her. He, who prided himself on his judgment and perception, had been played for a fool by his own cousin. The doubts had started as whispers, a careless word from a drunken footman who had seen Percival near Lady Ferris's rooms, the reappearance of the stolen pearls, discovered by a maid tucked away in a drawer where Genevieve had left them. Each new piece of information was a crack in the facade of Percival's story. Alistair had finally hired a man, a quiet, methodical investigator named Dawes, to uncover the truth. The reports had been trickling in for months, each one a nail in the coffin of Alistair's ignorance. Percival's debts, his association with Lady Danbury, who also owed him money, the testimony of the maid who had been paid to lie. The conspiracy was as sordid as it was simple. Percival had wanted to ensure Alistair remained unmarried and without a direct heir, leaving himself next in line. The rage, when it finally broke through Alistair's apathy, was a physical force. He had confronted Percival, not with a shout, but with a cold, terrifying quiet. He laid the evidence on the polished surface of his desk, watching his cousin's carefully constructed world crumble. Percival had blustered, then begged, then threatened. Alistair had simply had him removed, not just from the house, but from his life, his finances, his world. Lord Percival was ruined, exiled to the continent, with barely enough to live on, his name a curse in the halls he once hoped to own. But the victory was hollow. It did not bring back Genevieve. It did not erase his failure. He had let an innocent woman be destroyed to protect his own emotional distance. He had believed the worst because it required nothing of him. Dawes's final report lay on his desk. After 2 years of searching, he had found her, not in Bath or Cheltenham or any of the usual havens for distressed gentlewomen. He had found her in a tiny fishing village on the Cornish coast called Porthcaris. She was living under her maiden name, Thorne. She was, the report stated, running a small school for the village children. Porthcaris. The name felt foreign, mythical. He imagined Genevieve there, surrounded by the sea and the sky, a world away from the gilded cage of London. He had to go. He had to see her. He did not know what he would say, what he could possibly offer. An apology felt like an insult, a drop of water on a raging fire, but he had to try. He could not live in this silent, empty mausoleum of a house for one more day. He packed a single bag himself, forgoing his valet. He took one of his sturdiest horses, not the ducal carriage. This was not a journey for a duke. This was a pilgrimage for a man seeking absolution. The journey west was long. The manicured parks of the home counties gave way to rolling hills and then to the rugged, wind-swept coastline of Cornwall. The air changed, tasting of salt and wild things. With every mile he felt the weight of his title, his duties, his suffocating life begin to slip away. He was just Alistair, a man on a horse, riding toward the ghost of a woman he had wronged. He found Porthcaris nestled in a cove, a cluster of whitewashed cottages clinging to the cliffs like barnacles. The scent of fish and brine was sharp in the air, a clean, honest smell that was the antithesis of London's perfumed rot. He left his horse at the small inn and walked through the village. Fishermen mended their nets on the quay, their faces weathered by the sun and sea. Children with bare feet and tangled hair shouted and played on the sand. He saw her before she saw him. She was standing at the door of a small stone cottage, a slate-roofed building that seemed to have grown from the rock itself. A simple wooden sign hung beside the door. Porth Caris School, G. Thorne, Mistress. She was different. The soft, hesitant woman he remembered was gone. This Genevieve was leaner, her skin tanned by the sun. Her hair was pulled back simply, stray wisps escaping to whip around her face in the sea breeze. Her dress was plain, made of sturdy, faded blue cotton, her hands bare and capable. She was laughing, her head thrown back as a small girl with a cloud of reddish blonde hair handed her a fistful of wildflowers. Then he saw the others, a tall, serious-looking boy who had the same intelligent eyes he remembered, now older and more watchful. Two more children, a boy and a girl who looked to be twins, were chasing each other around a small vegetable patch behind the cottage. Four children. The reality of it hit him with a force that stole his breath. He had not just cast out a woman, he had cast out a family. He had condemned these children to this hardscrabble life. The guilt was a physical sickness rising in his throat. As if sensing his gaze, Genevieve turned. Her laughter died. Her eyes met his across the dusty lane. The warmth in her expression vanished, replaced by a look of such profound cold shock that he felt it like a slap. The wildflowers fell from her daughter's hand, scattering at her feet. She froze. For a moment the world seemed to stop, the cries of the gulls and the crash of the waves receding into a dull roar. He was here, the Duke of Blackwood, a spectre from another life, standing in the middle of her small, hard, one piece. Her first instinct was to run, to slam the door and bar it. Her second, a fiercer, more primal urge, was to protect. She pushed her youngest daughter, Rose, gently behind her skirts. She called out, her voice sharper than he had ever heard it. Leo, Ilara, Finn, inside. Now. The children stopped their play, their eyes wide as they took in the tall, imposing stranger. Leo, ever the little man of the house, moved immediately to his mother's side, his expression a mixture of fear and defiance. He stood between Alistair and his family, a 12-year-old boy ready to take on a duke. Alistair took a hesitant step forward, his hands feeling empty and useless at his sides. Genevieve, he said. Her name was a raw sound in his throat. It is Mrs. Thorne, she corrected him, her voice as cold and clipped as the winter sea. What are you doing here, Your Grace? Have you come to finish the job, to cast us out of this hovel as well? The title was a blade. He deserved it. No, he said, his own voice sounding hollow. I came to apologize. She let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. Apologize? An apology? 2 years later? You will forgive me if I find that difficult to accept. She stood her ground, a lioness guarding her cubs. The wind whipped a strand of hair across her face, and she did not bother to brush it away. He saw the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the strength in the set of her jaw. She was magnificent, and he had broken her. No, he corrected himself. He had tried to break her, and she had refused. She had forged herself into something stronger in the fire of his betrayal. I know, he said, the words inadequate. I know it is not enough. Nothing I can say is enough. But you must know, I was wrong. I was a fool. I was deceived. Deceived? She raised an eyebrow, her expression one of pure, undiluted cynicism. Or was it simply convenient, Your Grace? I was a problem, a penniless widow with 4 children, an unsuitable match for the great Duke of Blackwood. Your cousin merely provided you with a tidy excuse to be rid of me. He flinched. Her words were the truth, or at least a part of it he had not wanted to admit to himself. It had been convenient. His emotional cowardice had made him a willing participant in Percival's scheme. Yes, he admitted, the confession tearing from him. It was, and that is the worst of it. I did not defend you. I did not trust you. I failed you, and I failed your children. There is no excuse for it. His honesty seemed to surprise her. A flicker of something other than icy rage crossed her face before she shuttered it away again. She gestured vaguely at her surroundings, the humble cottage, the rocky garden, the endless roaring sea. As you can see, we have survived. We do not require your pity or your belated apologies. This is not pity, he insisted, taking another step closer. He could see the details of her face now, the dusting of freckles across her nose he had never noticed before. This is penance. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. She saw not the imperious duke from the ballroom, but a man who looked weary to his bones. His fine clothes were travel-stained, his face was unshaven, and his eyes held a deep, hollow ache that mirrored the one she had carried for so long. He wanted something from her. Forgiveness. Absolution. She had none to give. "You should not have come," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "There is nothing for you here." "You are here," he said simply. The air crackled with the weight of 2 years of unspoken pain. Leo still stood beside her, his small hand clenched into a fist. Rose peeked out from behind her skirts, her eyes wide with curiosity. Genevieve knew she held the power now. He had come to her world, on her terms. She could send him away with a word. She could make him suffer as she had suffered. But looking at the raw desperation in his eyes, she found she could not. Not yet. She drew a deep breath, the salt air filling her lungs. She had to make him understand the chasm that now lay between them. She had to show him the reality of the life he had condemned them to, a life he could never comprehend. "I am not the woman you knew in London, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady and clear. She gestured to her children, who were now gathered around her like a small, fierce tribe. "And this is my life. I have 4 children and no dowry. I have a leaking roof and a garden that yields more rocks than potatoes. I have my hands and I have my pride. That is all." It was a warning, a wall, a declaration of a reality he could not possibly breach. She expected him to recoil, to finally see the impossibility of his quest and retreat back to his world of comfort and privilege. Alistair looked at her, then at the 4 wary faces of her children. He saw the patched elbows on Leo's jacket, the faded ribbon in Alara's hair, the scuffed toes of Finn's boots, the way Rose clung to her mother's leg. He saw not a burden, but a family. A vibrant, breathing, fiercely loyal family that had survived in spite of him. A strange, unfamiliar emotion bloomed in his chest. It was not pity. It was a profound, aching respect. And something else. A longing so intense it was a physical pain. He met Genevieve's challenging gaze. A slow, wry smile touched his lips for the first time. A flicker of the man she had once thought she glimpsed. It did not reach his eyes, which were filled with a deep, sorrowful sincerity. He knelt. The Duke of Blackwood, a man who bowed to no one but his sovereign, knelt in the dusty lane of a Cornish fishing village, bringing himself to eye level with her children. "I have 4 children and no dowry," she had warned. He looked at Leo, then at the twins, and finally at little Rose, who was now staring at him with undisguised fascination. "Would 4 ponies be enough?" he asked, his voice quiet and serious, as if he were negotiating a treaty. "As a start?" Genevieve stared, dumbfounded. The sheer, breathtaking absurdity of the question shattered her composure. 4 ponies, as if that could mend the chasm between them, as if that could erase the hunger, the fear, the sleepless nights. It was the most ducal, most out of touch, most ridiculous thing he could have possibly said. And yet, a strangled sound escaped her. It was half a sob, half a laugh. The wall of ice around her heart did not melt, but a single hairline crack appeared. For the first time in 2 years, she did not know what to say. The children, however, did. "Ponies?" Finn breathed, his eyes as round as saucers. Alara gasped. "Real ones?" Rose took a brave step forward. "I want a white one." Only Leo remained suspicious, his arms crossed over his chest, his gaze fixed on Alistair with an unnerving intensity. "You cannot buy us," he said, his voice small but firm. Alistair did not look away from the boy. "You are right," he said gravely. "I cannot, and I would not try. But a man can try to make amends, and sometimes amends begin with ponies." He rose to his feet, brushing the dust from his trousers. He looked back at Genevieve, his expression open and vulnerable. "Let me try, Genevieve. Not with grand gestures. Let me stay. Let me fix the roof." She wanted to say no. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at her to send him away, but the sight of him kneeling in the dirt, the earnest look on his face as he spoke to her children, the ridiculous, heartbreaking offer of 4 ponies, it had disarmed her. "The inn is clean," she said, her voice tight. It was not an invitation, it was a dismissal, but it was not the final one he had expected. "You can fix nothing here." He nodded, accepting the temporary defeat. "The inn," he agreed. He gave a small formal bow. "Mrs. Thorne, children." He turned and walked away, his back straight, his steps measured. Genevieve watched him go, her heart a wild, frantic drum against her ribs. She pulled her children close, inhaling the familiar scent of soap and sea salt. "Is he really going to get us ponies, Mama?" Ilara whispered. Genevieve closed her eyes. "No, my love," she murmured, her voice thick. "I do not think so." But a small, treacherous part of her was not entirely sure. Alistair did not get them ponies. Not yet. He took a room at the Salty Dog, the village's only inn. It was a small, clean space with a lumpy bed and a window that overlooked the noisy quay. The smells of fried fish and stale ale were a constant presence. It was a world away from the silent, lavender-scented suites of Blackwood Manor. It felt more real than any place he had been in years. He did not approach Genevieve again the next day or the day after. He understood that she needed space, that his presence was a wound she had to grow accustomed to. Instead, he watched. From a distance, he observed the rhythm of her life. He saw her in the morning, leading her small flock of pupils into the cottage. He heard the sound of their recitations drifting on the wind, a chaotic but cheerful drone. He saw her working in her garden, her brow furrowed in concentration as she coaxed vegetables from the stubborn soil. He saw her haggling with fishermen for the day's catch, her voice firm and her eyes sharp. He saw her at night, a single lamp burning in her window long after the rest of the village was dark, and he knew she was mending clothes or preparing lessons, her work never done. He saw the exhaustion she tried so hard to hide. He saw the threadbare state of her children's clothes. He saw the constant grinding worry that etched fine lines at the corners of her eyes. And his guilt, a beast he had tried to starve, fed and grew stronger with every observation. On the third day, a storm rolled in from the sea. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind howled like a banshee through the narrow village streets. Rain came down in solid, driving sheets. Alistair, watching from his window at the inn, saw a section of slate tiles lift from the roof of Genevieve's cottage and shatter on the ground below. He did not hesitate. He pulled on his boots and a heavy coat he bought from the innkeeper and walked into the teeth of the gale. When he reached her cottage, water was already streaming down an interior wall, pooling on the floor. Genevieve was frantically moving furniture, her face pale with distress, while Leo tried to catch the deluge in a bucket. "Go away," she said when she saw him, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. She was overwhelmed. "Not until this is fixed," he stated, shrugging off his coat. "Where is your ladder?" She stared at him, at the Duke of Blackwood standing in her leaking cottage, his shirt sleeves already damp. She pointed a trembling finger toward a back shed. For the next 2 hours, Alistair worked on that roof in the driving rain. He was clumsy at first, his hands unused to such labor. But he was strong and he was determined. He found spare slates behind the shed, and, using a hammer and nails he borrowed from a curious fisherman next door, he began to secure the roof. The wind tore at him, the rain soaked him to the bone, but he did not stop. He worked with a singular focus, the physical exertion a welcome punishment, a tangible way to atone. From her window, Genevieve watched him. She saw the way his jaw was set in a hard line, the concentration in his eyes. He was not playing at being a commoner. He was simply a man fixing a roof because it needed to be fixed. When he was finally finished, he climbed down the ladder, drenched and shivering, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. He did not try to come inside. He simply nodded at her through the window. "It should hold now," he shouted over the wind. And then he walked back toward the inn, a solitary figure against the raging storm. That night, for the first time in 2 years, Genevieve did not check the forecast with a knot of fear in her stomach. The roof held. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. A tentative sun broke through the clouds. A delivery cart from the next town over rumbled into the village. It stopped in front of Genevieve's cottage. The driver, a stout man with a cheerful face, unloaded 4 large crates and a heavy sack of oats. Before Genevieve could even ask, the man tipped his hat. "Compliments of His Grace, ma'am. He said to tell you these were for the students." Inside the crates were not ponies, they were books, dozens of them. Spellers, grammars, histories, collections of poetry, and colorful picture books. There were slates for every child in her school, new chalk, pots of ink, and a ream of fine, clean paper. It was a treasure trove. It was more educational material than she could have dreamed of acquiring in a decade. The children gathered around, their eyes wide with wonder. They had been sharing a handful of battered primers for 2 years. This was a miracle. Genevieve felt that crack in her heart widen. This was not a grand ducal gesture designed to impress. It was thoughtful. It was practical. It was aimed not at her, but at the work she was doing, at the children she was trying to help. He had seen her not just as a wronged woman, but as a schoolmistress. He had respected her new life enough to contribute to it in a meaningful way. Later that day, as she was dismissing her pupils, she saw him walking on the beach below the cliffs. He was alone, skipping stones across the surface of the calm water. He looked smaller somehow, without his ducal armor, less like a force of nature and more like a man. On impulse, she walked down the winding path to the shore. He saw her coming and stopped, waiting for her, his posture tense. "Thank you," she said when she reached him. The words felt strange on her tongue. "For the books, and for the roof." "It was the least I could do," he replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It was a great deal," she admitted. "Why are you doing this, Alistair?" Using his first name felt like a momentous step. He turned to look at her, and she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Because I need to," he said simply. "I need to earn the right to even speak to you. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I know I have not earned that. I am asking for your tolerance. Let me stay. Let me prove to you that I am not the man I was." She studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. She found only a deep, profound weariness and a desperate sincerity. "My children are wary of you," she said, shifting the focus. "I know," he nodded. "Leo, in particular. He is a fine boy, protective. He loves you very much." The observation was so accurate, so gentle, that it caught her off guard. "Yes," she whispered, "he does." "I have no right to ask anything of them," Alistair continued, "but I would like to try and earn their trust, if you would allow it." She thought of the joy on her students' faces as they held their new books. She thought of the dry floor in her cottage. She thought of the solitary man on the beach. "You may walk with us tomorrow," she said, the decision forming as she spoke the words. "We collect shells on the north shore after lessons." It was a small offering, a truce, not a surrender. Alistair's smile was like the sun finally breaking through the storm clouds. "Thank you, Genevieve," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." The walks became a daily ritual. At first they were stiff formal affairs. Alistair walked a respectful distance from Genevieve, while the children clustered around her. Finn and Ilara, won over by the promise of ponies and the reality of his quiet kindness, soon began to orbit him, peppering him with 1,000 questions about London, horses, and castles. Rose, shy but curious, would offer him a perfect shell, holding it out in her small hand before retreating to the safety of her mother's skirts. Leo remained aloof. He walked with his mother, his gaze fixed on Alistair, a silent, judgmental sentinel. Alistair did not push. He answered the boy's rare, sharp questions with simple honesty. He never condescended. He treated Leo not as a child, but as the man of the house, a position the boy had earned. One afternoon, as they were exploring a series of rock pools, Finn slipped on a slick patch of seaweed and tumbled, his knee scraping hard against a sharp rock. The cut was deep, and the blood welled up immediately. The boy's cry was sharp with pain and shock. Before Genevieve could even react, Alistair was there. He knelt beside Finn, his voice calm and steady. "Let me see, Finn. It is all right. We will have you patched up in a moment." He examined the wound with a practiced eye. "It is a clean cut, but deep. We need to stop the bleeding and get it clean." He tore a strip from his own pristine linen shirt without a second thought. He gently but firmly wrapped it around the boy's knee, applying pressure. Then he looked at Leo. "Leo, I need your help," he said, his tone one of respect. "Your mother will need to get Finn home. Ilara and Rose will be frightened. Can you be brave enough to stay with them and help your mother while I run to the village for Mrs. Gable? You are the fastest runner I know." It was a masterful stroke. He had given Leo a vital adult role. He had acknowledged the boy's strength and put him in charge. Leo's suspicion warred with his desire to be useful. He looked at his crying brother, his frightened sisters, and his worried mother. He gave a single sharp nod. "I can." Alistair gave him a grateful look. "Good man." Then he turned and ran, his long legs eating up the distance back toward the village with a speed that surprised Genevieve. He moved with the grace of an athlete, a man not at all confined by a lifetime of ducal leisure. By the time Genevieve and the children had limped back to the cottage, Alistair was already there with Mrs. Gable, the village midwife and healer. Mrs. Gable, a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes, quickly and efficiently cleaned and stitched the wound. Throughout the ordeal, Alistair stayed in the background, fetching water, holding a lamp steady, his presence a quiet, reassuring support. Later, after Mrs. Gable had left and Finn was sleeping soundly with a piece of gingerbread in his hand, Leo approached Alistair, who was sitting on the small stone wall outside the cottage. "You tore your shirt," the boy said, pointing. Alistair looked down at the ruined sleeve. "It is only a shirt," he said. "Finn is what matters." Leo scuffed the dirt with his boot. "You run fast." "I used to race my brother when I was your age," Alistair said, a faint, sad smile on his face. A long silence fell between them. "The roof does not leak anymore," Leo said finally, as if the words were being pulled from him against his will. "Good," Alistair said softly. The boy took a deep breath. Perhaps you could show me how to skip stones tomorrow. The flat ones, the ones that go 7 times. Alistair's heart swelled. It was not forgiveness, it was not acceptance, but it was a start. It was a small stone skipping across a vast ocean of hurt. "I would like that very much, Leo," he said. From the doorway, Genevieve watched them. She saw the truce being forged between the Duke and her son. She felt the ice around her heart continue to crack. This man, this stranger who had shattered her world, was patiently, painstakingly trying to piece it back together, not with ducal power or wealth, but with torn shirts, quiet service, and respect for a 12-year-old boy. The ponies arrived a week later, not the showy, high-strung ponies of Hyde Park, but 4 sturdy, shaggy Shetland ponies, their eyes gentle and their temperament calm. They were delivered with saddles, bridles, and a letter for Genevieve. She opened it with trembling hands. It was not a love letter, it was a business proposal. "My dearest Genevieve," it began, the formal address a sign of his continued respect for her boundaries. "I have uncovered the full truth of my cousin Percival's deception. I have affidavits from the servants he bribed and a confession from Lady Danbury. I have the means to clear your name completely, but I will not do so without your permission. Your life here is your own, and I will not disrupt it for the sake of my own conscience. The choice must be yours. If you wish to remain Mrs. Thorne, I will burn this evidence and trouble you no more. If you wish to reclaim your name, I will stand with you. The decision is entirely yours. In the meantime, I hope the children enjoy their new companions. I have arranged for their stabling at the inn. The cost is my own and is not a debt you need to repay. It is a gift, freely given, yours, Alistair." She read the letter twice. He was giving her back her agency. He was not demanding she return to his world. He was offering her a choice. He was laying his power at her feet and letting her decide how it should be used. The ponies, she now understood, were not a bribe. They were an apology. A £400 hay-eating apology for each of her children. That evening, she found him at the inn. He was in the common room, reading a book by the fire. He looked up as she entered, his expression hopeful but guarded. "I received your letter," she said, standing before him, "and your ponies. Are they acceptable?" he asked, a hint of a genuine smile in his eyes. "They are absurd," she said, and this time the laugh that escaped her was real. It was rusty from disuse, but it was real. "They are wonderful. The children are ecstatic." "I am glad," he said. "Alistair," she said, her voice serious now, "show me the evidence." He led her to his room. On the small table he laid out the papers, the careful, damning report from Mr. Dawes, the signed statements. A letter from Percival, written from his exile in France, begging Alistair for funds and inadvertently admitting his guilt. It was all there, a meticulous, irrefutable dismantling of the lie that had ruined her. She read through it all, her hands shaking slightly. Seeing the sordid conspiracy laid out in black and white was both painful and vindicating. He had not just said he was deceived, he had proven it. He had gone to extraordinary lengths to uncover the truth, to do the work he should have done 2 years ago. When she finished, she looked up at him. The lamplight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the lines of strain and regret. "What do you want, Alistair?" she asked, her voice a whisper. He took a step closer, his gaze intense. "I want you," he said, his voice raw with the longing that had been building for 2 years. "I want to deserve you. I want to wake up every day for the rest of my life and try to be a man worthy of you and your children. I want to hear them laughing in the halls of Blackwood. I want to see you, not as a duchess, but as my partner, my equal, my wife." He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently take the papers from her hand. but I will only have that if you want it too, if you choose it, if you can ever find it in your heart to forgive me." She looked at the man before her. He was not the cold, arrogant duke she had fled. He was a man humbled by regret, a man who had spent 2 years searching for the truth and a month earning the trust of a wounded boy. He was a man who fixed roofs in the rain and bought books for a village school. He was a man who understood that apologies sometimes came in the shape of a shaggy pony. The last of the ice around her heart melted away. Not in a sudden flood, but in a quiet, steady thaw. The ache was still there, a ghost of the wound she had carried for so long, but it was no longer all-consuming. It was making room for something else, something fragile and tentative and full of a light she had thought was extinguished forever. Hope. "I cannot forget what happened, Alistair," she said softly. "It is a part of me now. It is a part of us." His face fell. "I understand. But," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "I can forgive it. I can forgive you." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost painful to watch. He looked as if he had been carrying an immense weight for years and had just been allowed to set it down. He did not kiss her, he did not sweep her into his arms. He did something far more intimate. He gently took her hand, the one with the calluses and the broken nail, and raised it to his lips. He pressed a soft, reverent kiss to her knuckles. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. They returned to London not as a conquering duke and his reclaimed possession, but as a team. Alistair, using the evidence he had gathered, systematically and publicly dismantled what was left of Percival's reputation and cleared Genevieve's name. He did it not in a ballroom, but through quiet, legal channels, ensuring the truth was entered into the right records and whispered through the right drawing rooms. The scandal was reversed. Lady Ferris was no longer a thief, but a victim of a cruel and desperate conspiracy. They were married in a small private ceremony with only Genevieve's children and a few trusted friends as witnesses. Leo stood beside Alistair as his groomsman, his posture straight and proud. Ilara, Finn, and Rose were the bridesmaids and page boy, their excitement barely contained. Returning to Blackwood Manor was strange. The house was just as vast and silent as Alistair remembered. But this time, the silence did not last. It was shattered within the hour by the sound of 4 children and 4 shaggy ponies being introduced to the sprawling grounds. The sound of their laughter echoed through the long corridors, chasing away the ghosts of regret and loneliness. The house came alive. The formal gardens were soon home to mismatched goalposts for a game of football. The library, once Alistair's silent sanctuary, became the site of nightly readings, with the Duke's deep voice bringing tales of dragons and knights to life for an enthralled audience of 4. Genevieve was not simply the new Duchess, she was the heart of the home. She and Alistair were partners in a way society could not comprehend. She advised him on his tenants and his investments, her practical, hard-won wisdom a perfect counterpoint to his strategic mind. Together, they established a foundation to provide education for orphaned children, a project born from her tiny school in Porthcaris. One cold winter evening, months after their return, Genevieve came looking for her husband. She found him not in his study, but on the floor of the nursery, a massive ducal man attempting to help a 7-year-old Rose build a castle out of wooden blocks. Finn and Ilara were decorating his boots with chalk, and Leo was sitting in a large armchair, ostensibly reading a book, but watching the scene with a small, contented smile. Alistair looked up and saw her in the doorway. His face broke into a smile, a real, unguarded smile of pure happiness. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm golden glow over the chaotic domestic scene. The air smelled of wood smoke, old books, and the faint, sweet scent of the gingerbread cookies Rose had been eating. He had once lived in a gilded cage, surrounded by wealth and power but trapped in a profound loneliness. She had once been a prisoner of circumstance, fighting for survival on the edge of the world. Now they had found their freedom, not in a title or an estate, but in the quiet, messy, beautiful reality of a family. She walked into the room, her heart full of a peace she had never thought possible. Alistair held out a hand to her. She took it, her fingers lacing with his. He was no longer a duke seeking atonement, and she was no longer a survivor demanding justice. They were simply Alistair and Genevieve, and they were home.